Welcome to Ask the FM Doctor, an interactive web series brought to you by the Simplard Foundation and IFMA to help you navigate the complex and ever-changing world of facility management. Whether you're a seasoned professional or a newcomer to the field, you'll find valuable insights and tips to deliver a better experience for your stakeholders while saving money. Join us on the third Tuesday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern U.S. time to learn from our FM docs while connecting with other facility managers from around the world. Register today at simplerfoundation.org/FM-doctor so you don't miss an upcoming session.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jake Smithwick. I am a professor at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte, and we're also here today on behalf of the Simplar Foundation. As these work, we'll have our typical agenda. We'll do some brief introductions. I'm also joined by our team here, Brian Lyons, who's a professor at the University of Kansas, Jeff Sawyer with the foundation, and also Derek Hillestad, and we'll have some other folks join us here in a moment. We'll do our brief teaching moment, and then we'll have some time for a Q&A at the end. And as always with these events, be sure to engage, ask questions, offer your thoughts and perspectives. Those are certainly appreciated, and we'll go through that. About the Simplar Foundation, the foundation's goal is to share and promote research findings in a variety of different settings. So if you have a need from a built environment standpoint or other questions you're interested in, definitely reach out to us, and we'd be glad to chat with you on that. Please be sure to update your Zoom name. So if you go click on Zoom, find yourself, and then click on More, and then rename. That'll help us in terms of attendance and other things related to that. So be sure to update your Zoom name if you can. So today's teaching moment is buying the right FM technology solution for your organization. This is a research project that we are currently wrapping up with IFMA. It's currently with the graphic design team, and that'll be available here. Brian, we're probably looking at about 2 to 3 weeks here. And so I want to highlight some of the key takeaways with that. And we'll have another future webinar that has a lot more detail, goes through the tools, but I just want to highlight some of the main things that we saw with that. So today's agenda, we'll go through the typical software evaluation criteria and a little bit of background about our research efforts with this. We'll talk about the best practices for technology procurements. And then finally, we'll close it out with some discussions about what are some future trends from an FM technology standpoint that we're seeing and how you can apply that to your day-to-day needs within your organization. So with our research project, we really had two main questions that we were seeking to better understand. Is if you are an FM organization looking to buy a piece of technology, how do you actually go about doing that? What are the best ways to do that? I assume that many of you, based on your attendance here today, have been through a FM procurement before, and if that case, you probably know that it is really challenging, not exactly fun, and so that's why we're we're here today to talk about that a bit. And then, of course, what are the best practices and steps, specific steps, and actually go through and talk about that. So a little bit of background, when I talk about technology, that can mean a variety of different things. The software, so the computer programs, web interfaces, the hardware, so building sensors, other physical assets or components, data management and analytics. Big data is a big part of what we're seeing in the FM space these days. And of course, any related professional services that are attached to that will also be a part of what we're considering here, right? Regardless of the type of technology we're looking at, we've specifically focused on where the FM is heavily involved in that procurement process. So if you've sat on the evaluation committee, if you've been a reviewer, or somehow otherwise involved, these are the types of projects that we're focused on here and hope to offer some additional perspective on this. So when you think about the typical life cycle of a technology project, there's a couple of main phases here. There's a master planning, which is really fundamentally a needs assessment. Do we need this project, and what does that kind of entail? There's a procurement side of it, so that's the scope, the RFP itself, the evaluations, product demos, other legal related things. There's a legal aspect of actually signing the contract and other negotiations, the deployment, actually rolling the technology out to our organizations, and finally, any long-term adoptions for our organizations as we look at this. So when you think about how this sets up and where we're focused on, we're really focused on the procurement side of it. Is once you've decided that, hey, we need to buy something, how do we actually go out and do that? So from a data collection standpoint, the first thing we did here is that we collected a bunch of RFPs in the technology space specific to FM. So common types of technologies that we looked at here include some of the ones that we're seeing here. And Brian, if you can jump on the meat box here. Some of the common technologies that we looked at were work order management, computer management, CMMS, other types of space planning and other technologies is what we had also focused on from that standpoint. And we also had BIM and other technologies as well. So that's the first thing we did is we collected a bunch of ITs and other components related to that. The second thing we did is we collected these RFPs for the last 5 years, and we looked at different technology types that are relevant to our project at hand. So access control, security systems, building management, and other related types of technologies.
Hey, Jake,
and I see
I want to pause there.
Yeah, go ahead.
I am not finding anyone who is off of mute, but we were definitely getting background noise from someone getting in and out of a car. So if that is you, maybe kindly leave or find another way to mute yourself.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it, Brian. Okay, so setting the stage, we collected a bunch of FM-focused technology RFPs in a variety of different spaces. So maybe you all have experience on these. And we looked at, okay, what do they typically do from an evaluation criteria standpoint? And here's some of the major lessons learned we saw as a result of these procurements. The first thing is that less than 50% of them shared their evaluation criteria. In other words, they said, we're looking to buy this RFP, this technology, and less than half of them actually said, well, here's how we're going to evaluate those different criteria. So sharing your evaluation weights, the percentages that you're going to look at, like the cost or the demos or their project plan, that's a best practice. And that is something you should absolutely be doing with your technology procurement. The other thing we found here is about 25% of them or a quarter provided a cost template. And the reason why we like cost templates is that this provides a apples to apples cost comparison. And this serves as a best practice to make sure that people can actually understand what is the best way to have that comparison between different cost structures of these technology buys. In my own experience going through a number of technology procurements, the costing aspect of it is really difficult because we all kind of mean different things. So therefore having the template can make that easier. And finally, out of the 110 plus RFPs looked at, nobody shared a budget. And what I mean by budget is here's how much money we allocated for the initial install. Here's how much we have for the annual maintenance side of things. Nobody provided that budget. Having that budget in place is a best practice because it helps the vendors better understand the scope or the nature of what we can actually buy given the money that we have available. So in summary here, these are the main types of criteria that people used inside of their RFPs. So functionality, implementation plan, different things related to that cost proposal, responsiveness. And you can see these are the average weights across all the different technology types we looked at. These are the ranges, from 10 to 65% for this first one and so forth, right? So these are the criteria. These are the average weights. And another best practice we have here is to have no more than 35% weight on any individual criterion, right? So if you have, let's say you're trying to look at, well, we want to get a full perspective, best value, let's say, on this technology buy, but let's say your cost weight is at 70%. I mean, this essentially becomes a low bid procurement because you have so much weight on the cost aspect of it, right? So the best practice here, the learning here, is to select your criteria, no more than 35%, and that'll make sure that there's a good balance between the different criteria that we are looking at. Again, make sure you use the chat box, ask questions. We're more than happy to stop and clarify. So be sure to engage as we go through and look at this. So let's focus now. So what are some of the additional specific best practices that we have as we look at this and other things that we can think about to make this more effective, right? So as we look at this, one of the main things we're focused on here is we can meet here, that'd be great. Yep, thank you. The IT procurement best practice for FMs, right? So what we did here is we looked at all the RFPs. We talked to several subject matter experts. We had a Delphi panel. We asked them, what are the best things to do in terms of structuring your RFP? In other words, how do you do that in terms of the structure? How do you go through the evaluation process? What criteria do you use? And this really summarizes the main learnings we had from this particular experience. The three key things I want to talk about here first for the actual RFP is what I want to call it here. The first one is to limit the proposal size. Has anybody, you can raise your hand now if you want to, but has anybody ever been on an RFP where like the proposal is like 100 pages thick, right? If you've ever been involved in that, I see a couple of head shakes here. It's not fun, right? Because first off, how often are you going to go through every single page in that giant proposal? The answer is nobody. The second thing here is our vendors don't like doing it. And if they do it, it's just a copy and paste job, which means it has no value to us. But the biggest reason why we like page limits is that it forces the vendors to highlight the key things that we're trying to explain on our proposals here. And so having those page limits, it forces us, it helps us to focus in on the major things that we're looking at with this. The next thing we recommend here is to conduct individual interviews. Many times what we see on procurements, especially in this space, is to have what are called team interviews. So this is an example of that, where you have the whole team coming in here. And what we find here is that certain people lead the conversation, right? And when you have these people that are leading the conversation, that can make things uncomfortable, or we don't actually understand, what each person's value is to the project. And because of that, well, maybe just the well-spoken marketing person or whoever is doing all the talking. And really, it's like if this is your on-site person, that's who you want to talk with, right? You want to hear what their thoughts are in an individual setting, not as a team interview. The other thing I'll say here too is that as you do these individual interviews, you want to also invite the key personnel that are attached to the project. So this would be the project manager. If it's like an HR type of FM project of sorts, you want to have that person. If it's a design, focused project or space planning, you might want to have the lead person involved with that. The lead implementer from the vendor side would be a good person to interview as part of that. The last thing I want to talk about or highlight is sometimes we have projects that we're procuring and we actually don't know the best way to do it in terms of a structure standpoint, in terms of scoping it out. What types of information do we need to have? Commonly in the procurement world, that's referred to as an RFI, a request for information. But what we have found is that the RFI has such a, I'll say, a negative taste in the industry, and bad taste in the mouth, because RFIs are also lots of pages, doesn't help anybody, and nobody likes doing it. So we came up with our team at Simplar is a new terminology called request for needs. And essentially what this is here is you're going to the industry saying, hey, here's the type of project we're looking to buy. What are the key things that we as the owner, as the FM, need to provide to you as a vendor in order for you to put together a high quality RFP response? So essentially an RFN, it's an informal process. It's not mandatory. It's not a contract at all. It is basically a informal discussion with these vendors. And the intent of that is to help us as an owner is to increase our, what we might call our project IQ. Is that when we finally issue the RFP, it has the relevant key information that the vendors need to put together a quality, strong proposal. Some of the challenges, the typical traditional RFI, they're not structured, too much information. You ask for trade secrets, right? That's not the intent of this here. And it really, frankly, requires a lot of time and effort from the suppliers to respond to. And at the end of the day here, we get a lot of marketing material and it's not helpful. So when we think about this RFN approach, it is very structured. It's informal, but still structured. We're not looking for market information. And we have seen that this can dramatically increase the overall quality and responses of these projects. I might call on Brian here for a moment. I know that Brian has run several of these RFNs. Brian, do you have any personal feedback about that approach? How does that actually help the owners? And any other thoughts or perspective from your standpoint on that?
Yeah, I think it's a mentality of approaching the industry software provider, system integrators, whatever your case may be, with a mentality of help you, help me type of idea, which is, hey, vendor community, what is the right information to include within our scope, our requirements, our background information with respect to our current state environments that will enable them to put together their best proposal, and ideally with minimal contingency or guesswork in their pricing. And so that's the mentality that we tend to go with. That request for needs is, hey, vendors, what do you need to know? Because if we're arming them with that information, which in turn gets us a better proposal. That's really the goal up front of your solicitation process, is to get the best proposal possible that is the most accurate. The goal is not to solve everything right up front. So that's the general mentality to adopt there. A lot of times, as you mentioned, with the poor perception of a request for information or RFI process, a lot of times we're going out there and we're searching for, hey, what's the industry capable of? What can you do? And that's really not the intent. That's more of a proposal stage type of element if you've given the right information about your scope and background.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, Brian. So to wrap up this RFN discussion, some of the high-level questions that we're thinking about here is, what, if any, are we missing from our scope of work or our statement of work? What are we missing for our background? Have we probably defined the fit gap phase in terms of what do we need to do to actually wrap up this RFP? Good or bad times to conduct, for example, the interviews? Is there other projects on the street that might affect your key personnel to be on the interviews, or any other information that the folks might want to know about that? So we have a lot more detail. If you find yourself having an upcoming procurement and you're not exactly sure how to structure it out, definitely reach out to myself or Brian, and we certainly can offer some thoughts and perspectives on that to make that a better practice. So that was another major point or major takeaway from this upcoming technology report that IFMA has, and be sure to look out that for a bit more detail as we get into that. So the last part of our discussion here today is I want to highlight some of the future forecast with regards to the technology perspective. We formed a Delphi panel, and basically a Delphi panel is a group of subject matter experts that have been in the field for a long time. They've seen a lot of different things, and we asked them, in your opinion, what's coming down the line here from a technology standpoint as an FM, and what do we need to be aware of, right? So in terms of current topics for today, strangely enough, one of the biggest things here has been the adoption of drone technology. And actually, see, we have one of our other FM doctors here today, Mike Bound. He's a professor at Brigham Young University. In fact, Mike, you are kind of the drone guru here from an FM standpoint. I was wondering if you could just talk to us briefly about what have you seen from drone technologies, and how have some of today's FMs kind of adapted that technology in their own organizations?
Well, we're seeing more and more organizations start to use them just for simple. Originally, they were used more for large scale monitoring, like pipelines or large surveying, things like that. But we're seeing more and more people using them now for FM maintenance needs. The simple building inspections where you can't get to a point in your building safely. The classic case we've seen a lot of now, and some of the other universities, Brian Stone, I think Brian Lyons as well, have been playing around with this. If there's a risk to somebody getting up and trying to inspect something at your site that's way off the ground, the cameras take really good images now, and it's not all that expensive to get a drone now with a thermal camera on it as well, not just an optical camera, so that you can be checking for insulation and things like that are not readily available to, or detectable with the naked eye.
Absolutely.
So it can be quite efficient, and it is in general a lot safer. And so I think those are the drivers behind the increasing adoption.
Sure.
We use them extensively here at the university, but they're being used by our FM department, uses them here at the university.
That's awesome, Mike. Yeah, I know here on our campus too, we're thinking about it. And again, there's numerous FMs that said, if I don't have to climb up on the roof today and I can still do my inspections, shoot, I'll tell you what. Now, it's funny personal story about Mike. A couple of years ago, Mike and I were talking about drones, and I had boasted, well, I've never crashed my drone. And Mike said, well, I've crashed mine numerous times. And literally, not joking, folks, the next day I had crashed my drone. So I got ahead of myself here, and now you got to pay for it, right? So yeah, drones, and thanks, Mike, for your comments about that. Drones are definitely increasing in use. They're pretty easy to use. The other thing here we're seeing a lot of is the digitalization of historically physical records. So take your as-built plans, stuck in a file cabinet somewhere, and now converting those to eventually a BIM model, it's a digital 3D model of what the site looks like. There's other technologies that I can also use that type of information. So we're seeing a lot of folks that are kind of moving towards that space. And then lastly, this is not exactly tied to the technology space, but more use of hybrid work environments. IFMA is getting ready to release another survey that's going to be focused on the return to the workplace and what are some of the other impacts from FM standpoint, but especially how do we tie technology into that? How do you better connect your people, even though we used to be on one building, but now we're a little bit dispersed and maybe people are coming and going. That's also a continuing trend that we're seeing currently these days. The next question we asked our Delphi panel was, okay, how about 5 years from now? What do you see coming? The biggest thing that they said here is that a tighter integration between our BIM, our building information modeling, the 3D models, our maintenance requirements, and then the automation part of our buildings. Right now, in general, these are typically 3 or 4 separate systems, their own silos. And based on talking with our Delphi panelists, these are going to be coming together as one single integrated solution that doesn't really see the differences between these technologies. Again, there's still work ongoing. Anybody who's ever tried to integrate one IT solution with a different technology, it is very difficult. But we're seeing more of that coming down the line because it just makes it, that one source of truth can make things a lot easier. Building management systems and smart buildings are continuing to grow, not just on the heating and cooling side of things, but for access control, closed circuit televisions, carbon footprints, other things that are kind of attached to that. Data collection will become richer. So anybody who's heard that phrase big data, we can data on all sorts of things here. And right now, I think a lot of the times as organizations, we have these big giant piles of data and we're not exactly sure what to do with it. And so as we go forward the next few years, we'll likely see more developments in that space. And then finally, when we think about, to infinity and beyond here, 10 years out, having that single source of truth of everything from an FN standpoint, modularization of buildings, not just like this room can be a conference room or it could be an office or whatever, but really what our panelists told us is that take an entire space, a building, and you can repurpose that based on the needs of whoever the tenants might be in a much more rapid fashion. Again, IoT is continuing to gain steam. We'll likely see more of that in the future. Artificial intelligence. So the current topic, hot topic today is ChatGPT, which is basically a website you can ask the questions and it's like interfacing with the human, but not obviously not that from an FN standpoint, but more of a artificial intelligence standpoint of what's going to happen now, like from a maintenance standpoint on our equipment that we need to be aware of like today, and having better computer-aided insights as to actually assessing all of your assets and your equipment to provide better, more customized recommendations as to what we're seeing on that. The last interesting thing here, I think, from our interviews is that some people suggested that in the future, there will be dedicated people from the IT group that are for FM specifically. So you have an IT director of facilities, right? Or somebody that works in IT, but they're specifically focused on the building, the physical assets itself. We've not really seen a whole lot of that, and we'll likely see that trend continue here. But regardless of what happens, of course, I, for one, continue to welcome our computer overlord Sunday, so we'll likely see more of that as I come down to it, right? So in summary here, key takeaways for our discussion here today. Evaluation criteria is quite varied. You saw the table. There's all sorts of ideas that people come up with. Main things to keep with that in mind is keep your total weights to 35% or less. And second thing is to keep it simple. You don't need to ask for everything under the sun. Just focus on the key main things here that can help you actually make a decision when you're looking to hire that firm to do something for you. Second main thing here is best practices for a good RFP. Really simple things, but I tell you what, folks, after having done literally hundreds of projects together, our team, probably thousands of projects, RFPs, is that these small things here make a big difference. Limit the proposal size. Do individual interviews, and if you're not sure what to do from a scoping standpoint, that RFN process certainly has benefit as well. And finally, the FM of the future, I think, will be much more tech savvy. So understanding the tools and technology and really adding that to our tool belt or our wheelhouse of knowledge will be something that we continue to see in the future here. So big data is coming, and we need to be ahead of that and acknowledge what's going on from that standpoint.
Join us on the third Tuesday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern U.S. Time to learn from our FM docs while connecting with other facility managers from around the world. Register today at simplerfoundation.org/FM-doctor.